Welcome to Washington Today for October 18th, 2021. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Here are some headlines. Reaction and tributes continue coming in for Colin Powell, the former top U.S. general and Secretary of State who died Monday morning of complications from COVID-19. Powell's family said that he had been fully vaccinated and was receiving treatment at Walter Reed National Medical Center. He also had been reportedly diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a type of cancer. The Biden administration has asked the Supreme Court to lift an order imposed by a federal appeals court that has allowed Texas to continue enforcing its strict abortion law. The law has been in effect since September and bans abortions after about 6 weeks and before some women know they are pregnant. Former President Donald Trump is suing the House January 6th Select Committee and the National Archives to block the release of his White House's records relating to the January 6th Capitol attack. The former president's lawyers filed the suit in D.C. District Court on Monday. It names the January 6th committee chair, Representative Benny Thompson, and the National Archivist, David Ferriero, along with the committee and the archives, and it calls the January 6th investigation a, quote, vexatious illegal fishing operation. Russia is suspending its diplomatic mission to NATO and closing the alliance Moscow office, according to Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. It comes after NATO expelled 8 Russian diplomats from its mission in Brussels earlier this month, saying they were working as spies. And 2 long-serving House Democrats, David Price of North Carolina and Mike Doyle of Pennsylvania, announced Monday that they won't seek re-election next year. The retirements come after House Budget Committee Chairman John Yarmuth of Kentucky also announced last week he won't seek re-election. All 3 members represent safe seats that aren't expected to be competitive in next year's midterm elections. But we begin with the death of former Secretary of State and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair Colin Powell. The former top U.S. general died this morning of complications from COVID-19. In a statement posted to Facebook, his family said, quote, "We want to thank the medical staff at Walter Reed National Medical Center for their caring treatment. We lost a remarkable, loving husband, father, grandfather, and a great American." Colin Powell's decades of distinguished service are drawing tributes from leaders in the U.S. and around the world. In a statement, President Biden said that Colin Powell, quote, "will be remembered as one of our great Americans. From his front seat view of history, advising presidents, and shaping our nation's policies, Colin led with his personal commitment to the democratic values that make our country strong. Time and again, he put country before self, before party, before all else, in uniform and out, and it earned him the universal respect of the American people." Colin Powell was born on April 5, 1937 in New York City to Jamaican immigrant parents in the South Bronx. He studied at City College of New York, where he participated in ROTC, and after graduating in 1958, he joined the U.S. Army and was deployed to South Vietnam, where he was wounded twice. He joined the Reagan administration in 1987 as National Security Advisor, then transitioned to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1989. He was the first African American to hold both jobs. Today aboard Air Force Two, Vice President Kamala Harris talked about General Powell's legacy.
You know, he is the first black man to be Joint Chiefs, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to be National Security Advisor, to be Secretary of State. Every step of the way, when he filled those roles, he was, by everything that he did and the way he did it, inspiring so many people. And there's been a lot of conversation about that, how young service members and others, not only in the military, but in our nation and around the globe, took notice of what his accomplishments meant as a reflection of who we are as a nation. And I think that's one of the most important things to take away, which is that he broke so many barriers, and those barriers were not easy to break by any stretch, but he did it with dignity, he did it with grace, and because of what he was able to accomplish, it really did elevate our nation in so many ways. So may he rest in peace.
After retiring from the military, President George W. Bush tapped Colin Powell to be his Secretary of State. And after the 9/11 attacks, Secretary Powell helped gain global support for the war on terror and the invasion of Afghanistan. He also faced criticism after his 2003 UN speech where he showed supposed evidence that the Iraqi military had illegal weapons of mass destruction. The UN inspectors, however, later found that there were no such weapons in Iraq. Secretary Powell later said that he regretted the remarks and called the speech a, quote, blot on his record. Well, President George W. Bush praised Colin Powell's service in a statement saying, quote, many presidents relied on General Powell's counsel and experience. He was such a favorite of presidents that he earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom twice. He was highly respected at home and abroad, and most important, Colin was a family man and a friend. The current Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, also paid tribute to his predecessor today here in Washington, D.C. Here's a portion of his comments.
He gave the State Department the very best of his leadership, his experience, his patriotism. He gave us his decency, and the State Department loved him for it. Secretary Powell trusted the career workforce here. He empowered them. He made sure that the desk officer who knew a particular country or issue most deeply was the one who got to brief him or the president. He told his staff that they didn't need to worry about getting him fancy lunches. Hamburgers and hot dogs were just fine. When he hopped onto the elevator, he'd pull others on with him. He didn't bother with formalities. And he wasn't overly concerned with hierarchy either. He wanted to hear from everyone. He walked around the building, dropping into offices unannounced, asking what people needed, making sure they knew he was counting on them. Secretary Powell was, simply and completely, a leader, and he knew how to build a strong and united team. He treated people the way he expected them to treat each other, and he made sure that they knew he would always have their back. The result was that his people would walk through walls for him.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Colin Powell reached the rank of 4-star general in 1989, joining Dwight Eisenhower and Alexander Haig as the only men since World War II to earn that rank without ever serving as a division commander. Here's current Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin speaking about General Powell's legacy.
Secretary only has a very few words, just a few seconds, no questions. I'm going to turn it over to the Secretary.
I was informed earlier of the loss of Colin Powell, and I want to take just a second to express my deepest condolences to Alma, his wife, his son Michael, and the entire Powell family. The world lost one of the greatest leaders that we have ever witnessed. Alma lost a great husband, and the family lost a tremendous father. And I lost a tremendous personal friend and mentor. He has been my mentor for a number of years. He always made time for me, and I could always go to him with tough issues. He always had great counsel. We will certainly miss him. I feel as if I have a hole in my heart just learning of this just recently. First African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs, first African-American Secretary of State, a man who was respected around the globe and who will be, quite frankly, it is not possible to replace a Colin Powell. We will miss him. Again, my thoughts and prayers go out to the family, and we're deeply, deeply saddened to learn of this. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That's Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Colin Powell is survived by his wife of 59 years, Alma. They have 3 children, son Michael and daughters Linda and Anne Marie. Colin Powell was 84. The Senate returned from its one-week break today, with Democrats continuing to hash out their differences on the president's 2-part infrastructure package. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki talking about the latest developments to reporters.
Thanks, Jen. I just want to see if you can elaborate a little bit on something you just said, that you're encouraged by the accelerated pace of talks on infrastructure. What changed? Is there something that's different now?
The president is certainly feeling an urgency to move things forward, to get things done. I think you've seen that urgency echoed by members on the Hill who agree that time is not unending here, and we are eager to move forward with a unified path to deliver for the American people.
Does the sense of urgency have anything to do with the president's trip coming up in just a matter of 8 working days? Does he feel the need to get this wrapped before he leaves?
The good news is that there are phones and video conference capabilities overseas for every president and individual, so I'm not here to set new deadlines or timelines. But it is also true that we have been at this for some time. The president proposed these plans back in the spring. We have been, he has participated in dozens and dozens of calls, of meetings, of engagements with members to hear their viewpoints, to understand where they're coming from, to reach consensus. And we are at a point where we feel an urgency to move things forward. And the pickup of meetings is a reflection of that.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. And here's Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell in his leader time remarks on the Senate floor today.
Back in the springtime, they used the pandemic as an excuse to pass a massive spending bill that the White House boasted was the most left-wing legislation in American history. Now, families are paying the painful price. The country's deep in this hole that Democrats dug. But they're showing no indication, none, that they want to stop digging. Led by our socialist colleague, the distinguished senator from Vermont, Chairman Sanders, Washington Democrats are plowing forward with yet another reckless taxing and spending spree that would make their huge inflationary package from the springtime look like child's play by comparison. They want the government to borrow and print multiple trillions more dollars and dump all that spending into the heads of families that are already struggling to stay afloat. Meanwhile, Democrats want to saddle a sputtering economy with the biggest peacetime tax hikes on record, obliterating President Biden's promise not to raise taxes for the vast majority of American families, and leaving American job creators with tougher tax rates than businesses pay in communist China. Or look at energy prices. Americans are already paying more at the pump than they have in 7 years. But now our colleagues want to go beyond their war on gasoline and slap new taxes and new regulations on other domestic energy sources, such as natural gas. But winter is fast approaching. The whole world is stealing for huge price increases in natural gas. Our friends in Europe are frantically trying to secure their gas supply lines, and Russia is threatening to turn the continent's winter heating into a political hostage. But inexplicably, Democrats' response is essentially to have America stand down as an energy superpower. New taxes and new regulations on top of the inflation that is already wreaking havoc.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on the floor earlier today. With more on the week ahead in Congress, we spoke to Alayna Treene of Axios on what's next on Capitol Hill.
I mean, Congress has been sprinting for a bit, but I think the next few weeks and really until the end of the year is going to be a lot of chaos on Capitol Hill. There's a lot that Democrats in particular, but lawmakers just in general have to get done. And it starts with their reconciliation package. So the massive social spending package that President Biden and Democrats have been trying to put together for several weeks or months now is really kind of hitting its crucial time period. And they still haven't agreed on a price tag, Democrats, or there's a lot of sticking points still, like prescription drug reform, climate change provisions, a lot of things that they need to work out. And they have a deadline right now that they're trying to set with that. They want to try to get an agreement by the end of the month, if not pass it by the end of the month, which is going to be very difficult, just given, again, how many details they still need to iron out on that. They also have their infrastructure bill. The House needs to pass. It was passed in the Senate in August. It's still waiting to be passed in the House because a lot of progressives want that other, roughly, as of now, roughly $2 trillion social spending package to be passed first. And so that may not pass because it's being held up by the other bill. And then, of course, there's other things. There's a lot of things that Congress has pushed off. They've pushed off government funding. They did a short-term funding bill in September that pushed it off until December. So December 3rd, we're going to see they're going to need another government funding bill to avert a shutdown. There's also the debt limit problem that was pushed off. And that's supposed to, they're going to need to extend that again at some point in December, maybe January, depending on how long it takes to run out of the short-term money that they just extended. And then a lot of other things like national defense authorization spending. They're going to do a voting rights bill this week. So there's just a lot that they need to get done. And it's going to be crucial. I think the big thing here is it's going to be crucial to, of course, fulfilling the president's agenda, but also, the midterms are creeping up on us. They're just over a year away, and that's going to be key for Democrats next year.
When it comes to the reconciliation bill, you said that a no top line figure has been made yet, but as far as programs that the president initially wanted and that may go by the wayside because of a reduction of numbers, is there a sense of what programs might be on the chopping block, so to speak?
There are. There's a few things that are being discussed as on the chopping block. One thing, and this is hard though, because I think if you ask progressives and then you ask moderates, they're going to have two different answers. So there has been some discussion of cutting some parts of the Medicare expansion. There's dental coverage, things like that. Those are something that someone like Bernie Sanders and other progressives are saying there's no chance that gets cut. But that's some things that we're hearing in the background are being looked at as, potential things that they might have to put aside for now. Climate change, there's a lot of climate change provisions in there. There's going to be a lot of climate change provisions that are in the bill, but how many, and certain ones that, different people in Congress are really hoping remain may end up getting cut. And we saw this from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. She's been increasingly kind of hinting that we may need to do less with this package in order to pass it. And I think the key thing, and I wrote this in that story that I published yesterday, just kind of laying it all out, is that Democrats will soon have to decide, is something better than nothing? And it's something that a lot of people on the Hill often say, don't let a few good things be, or a few small things be the enemy of the good. And that's kind of what we're looking at here, is if they may need to settle for a smaller package in order to get it across the finish line.
Alayna Treene, those hurdles that you mentioned, how much of that in the current day deals with Senators Manchin and Sinema?
Several of them. And yes, so I think we hear about Senators Manchin and Sinema all the time, and they really are the two Senate holdouts. And they are being very clear that they have a lot that they disagree with this package. They want it to be smaller. They think some of the provisions are too overreaching. And I should say, we often talk about them together. And that's one thing that I think, is just worth mentioning, is that they have two different ideals. And there's some things that Senator Manchin wants that Senator Sinema doesn't, or Senator Sinema want. Some of those things are like prescription drug reform. Senator Sinema is seen as someone who she is generally for prescription drug reform, but not the as ambitious proposals that progressives want in the package, where someone like Joe Manchin doesn't mind those as much. Climate change, though, is something that Senator Sinema is very much for. She wants a very bold climate change section of this package, whereas Senator Manchin has been the one who's kind of been focusing negotiations on that. So that's just one thing to mention. But they are the two holdouts, as people are calling them, in the Senate. And it really matters because they need all 50 Democratic senators to sign on to this package in order for it to pass. If they're going to do this via the reconciliation process, which is a budget process on the Hill that essentially, it's very complicated, but you only need a simple majority in the Senate in order to pass, not the normal 60 vote threshold or the filibuster that we see for major legislation. And so they need those votes for this to pass. And they're very clear that they have they're going to take a lot of work in order to get those votes. And so we've seen this over the past several months now. We saw both of the senators having meetings with the White House and the president. There was a time, I think, when Senator Sinema, was at the White House 4 times in one day, meeting with President Biden. And they really are key. I think that from what we're hearing, negotiations are ramping up this week. It's going to be a huge week to decide if they can meet that end of year deadline. And yes, you're right. Those 2 senators are the ones who are going to need the most coaxing in order to get this over the line.
Axios congressional reporter Alayna Treene on this morning's Washington Journal program. You can find the entire interview along with the rest of the program on our website at cspan.org/WJ. You're listening to Washington Today.
Here are some of the live events on Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio. At 9:30 a.m. Eastern, the Senate Finance Committee considers the nomination of Chris Magnus to be Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He's currently the police chief of Tucson, Arizona. And at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol meets to recommend the full House cite Stephen Bannon for criminal contempt for not complying with a subpoena to testify before the committee. Listen to these events live on C-SPAN Radio, on the C-SPAN Now app, or streamed at cspan.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Here's some more headlines. Members of the House Judiciary Committee are threatening a criminal investigation of Amazon. 5 members, including Chair Jerry Nadler, sent a letter Monday to Amazon President and CEO Andy Jassy, giving the tech giant until November 1st to, quote, correct the record about its business practices. The letter states that the committee is considering whether to refer the matter to the Department of Justice. It follows a Reuters investigation last week that showed Amazon had conducted a systematic campaign of copying products and rigging search results to boost sales of its own brands. Other members signing on to the letter include Colorado Republican Ken Buck, Washington Democrat Pramila Jayapal, Rhode Island Democrat David Cicilline, and Florida Republican Matt Gaetz. The Supreme Court on Monday sided with law enforcement in a pair of cases concerning the issue of qualified immunity. That's the doctrine that gives police broad legal protection. In a pair of unsigned summary rulings, the court reversed 2 federal appeals court decisions, one from California and one from Oklahoma, that had permitted excessive force lawsuits to proceed, saying the plaintiffs did not prove that the officers violated a, quote, clearly established right. EPA Administrator Michael Regan said his agency is taking a series of actions to regulate a group of toxic industrial compounds. The compounds known as PFAs are increasingly turning up in public drinking water systems, private wells, and even food. Manufacturers still use the chemicals, and public water systems are not required to monitor for them. PFAs are also called forever chemicals because they last so long in the environment. They have been linked to a list of health problems, including high cholesterol, suppressed immune systems, infertility, and some cancers. And it may only be October, but many experts are saying don't wait to start your holiday shopping because the pandemic has left one very destructive issue in its wake: disruption to global supply chains. The disruption has already hit grocery store shelves, with prices on paper products and meat and chicken going up while availability goes down, and some experts are predicting that prices on some holiday gifts like toys and electronics could go up too. Here's Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who predicted that the supply chain issues will continue into 2022.
Major supply chain disruption in the U.S. right now, causing everything from higher prices to longer waits for products. Moody's warns that these supply chain disruptions, quote, will get worse before they get better, unquote. Do Americans need to prepare ourselves for this to get worse before it gets better?
Well, certainly a lot of the challenges that we've been experiencing this year will continue into next year, but there are both short-term and long-term steps that we can take to do something about it. Look, part of what's happening isn't just the supply side, it's the demand side. Demand is off the charts. Retail sales are through the roof. And if you think about those images of ships, for example, waiting at anchor on the West Coast, you know, every one of those ships is full of record amounts of goods that Americans are buying because demand is up, because income is up, because the president has successfully guided this economy out of the teeth of a terrifying recession. Now the issue is, even though our ports are handling more than they ever have, record amounts of goods coming through, our supply chains can't keep up. And of course, our supply chains, that's a complicated system that is mostly in private hands, and rightly so. Our role is to be an honest broker, bring together all of the different players there, secure commitments, and get solutions that are going to make it easier.
Many American companies, especially small businesses, as you note, are struggling to cope with these supply chain disruptions. One possible solution, President Biden lifting former President Trump's tariffs on China to try to provide some relief. That's not a panacea, but it could provide some relief. Will President Biden do that? Will he lift those tariffs?
Well, I think every idea is being taken seriously, but what we're doing right now is to focus on the operations themselves. A lot of Americans might be surprised to learn that our ports have not generally operated on a 24/7 basis. We've secured commitments to change that, and the president announced that the ports of LA and Long Beach actually was piloting this for a few weeks. Collectively, those two ports are 40% of our container traffic. They're now going 24/7. That's not a simple thing to do overnight, but it was a big commitment. Now we got to make sure that that works its way through the chain, because of course it's not just the gate of the port, it's getting those containers onto a chassis, getting them to where they need to be, and that goes to other issues in our supply chain, like the availability of truckers. So we're taking steps on that, like my department working with state DMVs to speed the issuing of CDLs, those commercial driver's licenses, so that we can get more qualified, safe truckers on the road. There are a lot of steps that we're taking right now to address this in the short term, but also, at risk of repeating myself on something that I've been talking about and the president's been talking about all year, this is one more example of why we need to pass the infrastructure bill. There are $17 billion in the president's infrastructure plan for ports alone, and we need to deal with the long-term issues that have made us vulnerable to these kinds of bottlenecks when there are demand fluctuations, shocks, and disruptions like the ones that have been caused by the pandemic.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg yesterday on CNN's State of the Union. Also speaking on the issue was Ohio Republican and House Judiciary Ranking Member Jim Jordan.
Meanwhile, I was just in California this past week. I saw the ships. I saw them, and they're in the Los Angeles area. You saw them just anchored offshore. And as I talked to some of the folks there, they said they've been there for months. So when you pay people not to work, you shouldn't be surprised when you don't have workers. And then when you add on top of that the crazy policies in the state of California, you get this situation where we have rising prices and, as you said, empty shelves. This is what happens when you have people in the Biden administration who have gotten everything wrong.
Is it time for Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary, to go?
Well, I don't know that he's been there, right? So, I mean, if he'd have been there, it would have been different. Who knows? What we do know is this administration, every single policy area is now worse than it was under President Trump. We had things moving in the right direction in a big way under President Trump. These guys have messed up everything. But again, it's driven by their crazy policies. And when you have the President of the United States begging OPEC to increase oil production, particularly when just a few months ago we were energy independent, that tells you how serious, how bad the situation is.
Ohio Republican Jim Jordan. We end today with more on the passing of Colin Powell. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi paid tribute to him in a statement saying, quote, General Colin Powell was a patriot leading at the highest levels and blazing a trail for generations to come. His loss is another sad indication of the devastating toll that the coronavirus continues to take on our country. As we pray for General Powell's loved ones, we pray for the families of the nearly 725,000 Americans who have been taken from us by this vicious virus. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair also weighed in, saying Colin Powell was, quote, wonderful to work with. He inspired loyalty and respect, and that, quote, his life stands as a testament not only to dedicated public service, but also a strong belief and willingness to work across partisan divisions in the interest of his country. And former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright called Powell, quote, an American icon whose career in public service will always be celebrated and remembered. But to me, he was simply my friend Colin. Although we grew up in different contexts, we bonded over our family's immigrant stories, our deep love of America, and our belief in the importance of public service. Colin Powell has more than 400 appearances in the C-SPAN video library. In 2012, he appeared on Book TV to talk about his memoir, It Worked for Me. Here's a portion of that discussion.
I didn't know until reading the book that an important text for you on the subject of confidence is the movie The Hustler.
The Hustler, yeah. Yeah.
What's so important about The Hustler?
The Hustler, for those of you who are not old enough to remember the movie, it's a movie about a pool hall. And Paul Newman goes by the name of Fast Eddie Felson. And he's determined to be the champion. He thinks he's the best in the world. And he goes into this pool hall in New York. And he's going to play Minnesota Fats, who was played by Jackie Gleason. And so the game starts. And Fast Eddie is good. He's very, very good. But Minnesota Fats has this manager or financer who's sitting in a chair, George C. Scott, watching all of this. And as the evening goes on and they're drinking and shooting pool, Eddie's just beating the devil out of Minnesota Fats. And Minnesota Fats is becoming desperate. And he keeps looking to George C. Scott to get him, what do I do? What do I do? And Scott finally says to him, stick with this kid. He's a loser. And that kind of stuns everybody. And then they play some more. Minnesota Fats keeps losing. Eddie says, I got him. And then Minnesota Fats excuses himself, goes into the bathroom. He comes out a few minutes later, and he's reaching for his coat, they think. And as the attendant is about to bring his coat out to him, instead of taking his coat, Minnesota Fats just smiles and puts his hands out and has some talcum powder poured into his hands. And then he rubs the hands, he looks at Fast Eddie, he says, Fast Eddie, let's play some pool. And then he beats the devil out of him, of course. And Fast Eddie is crushed. So Minnesota Fats never gave up, perpetual optimism. He thought he could win, he did win, and he worked against Eddie Felson's weakness. And as I say in the book, I love that scene. And many a day when I was in trouble, which was a frequent occasion during my public life, and I had to go testify before Congress or go face a hostile press. So help me, I would put my uniform on or my suit, and I would go into my restroom, and I would wash my hands, and I would look in the mirror, and I'd say to myself softly, Fast Eddie, let's play some pool. And then I would go.
But as you mentioned,
yeah, I never watched the last scene.
You don't watch the end of the movie.
No, because of course Eddie's Fast Eddie, and Paul Newman is the star of the movie. He has to beat Fats at the end. But I never watch it. I don't want to see that.
You can see more from that event and others at cspan.org. Just search Colin Powell. A reminder that all of our coverage is online anytime at cspan.org. And if you missed any of this program, you can find it on our new C-SPAN Now app at cspan.org/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington delivered daily right to your inbox, you can subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, former Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, David Michaels, discusses OSHA's role in President Biden's COVID-19 vaccination and testing policy. And then former Republican Federal Election Commission Chair Brad Smith weighs in on free speech issues, such as Senate Democrats' push for campaign finance reform and allegations of free speech infringement at school board meetings by parents protesting COVID rules. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our new mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.